Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to continue with the topic of nutrition. As you have already discussed basic concepts of nutrition and briefly about enteral and parenteral nutrition. Today we are going to just continue with parenteral nutrition. As you know, by definition, parenteral nutrition is given through any route other than the orogastric or nasogastric route. So if you're not using tube that is passed into the GIT, then we call it enteral nutrition, or in other words, if we are giving nutrition directly into the veins, that is enteral nutrition, parenteral nutrition. As you can imagine, if you're going to bypass the gut, you will bypass major absorptive procedures that take place, the digestion that takes place, all the enzymes in the gut and the pH of the stomach, and all those are bypassed. So when you're giving parenteral nutrition, you need to give it in an elemental or a pre-digested form. What it means is you give proteins as amino acids, you give carbohydrates as dextrose, you give fats as lipid emulsions, and you give electrolytes, minerals and vitamins along with it. You give it in a pre-digested form. When it's going into the blood, it will go directly into the liver or into the organs. There won't be any space in between for it to be digested. What are the indications of parenteral nutrition? The first and the most important is when the patient cannot take enteral nutrition for any reason. If the gut is not available, or if the patient is not able to use his due to massive trauma, he is not able to take food orally, or due to any other cause, if the intestinal route is unavailable, then we consider parenteral nutrition. Inability to obtain enteral access. For example, if the patient is of stroke, in such patient it is very difficult to perform nasogastric intubation, and it is also not they're not very fit for surgical procedures, so that we cannot put in a feeding jejunostomy or feeding gastrostomy. So in those patients, we can just put in a IV line and we start parenteral nutrition. In severe acute pancreatitis, when the absorptive procedures of the gut are deranged, so again, and in short bowel syndrome, there is not enough absorptive surface left. In mesenteric ischemia, again the gut is non-functional, the remaining gut is also under a lot of stress, so we consider parenteral nutrition. Paralytic ileus, the gut isn't functioning properly. High output GI fistulas. For any fistula, the first treatment is give it rest, reduce the preload. So if there is a fistula somewhere in the intestine connected to the skin, we cannot give enteral nutrition, because it will just worsen the condition of that fistula. But if we can gain an enteral access beyond the point of the fistula, then we might be able to use enteral route. Otherwise, we have to consider parenteral routes. For build-up of patients before major surgery, if the patient isn't taking enough oral nutrition and you want to prepare him for some major procedure, you may put him on TPN for a while, or inflammatory bowel disease, again when the gut isn't functioning properly. Then there are some contraindications as well to parenteral nutrition. If we have a functioning gastrointestinal tract, that is usually our first priority. We do not go for a parenteral route if the gut is available and if it's functioning properly. If the treatment is anticipated for short duration of time, if it is 5 days or less, and the patient is not very much malnourished, we don't need to consider parenteral nutrition. If there is inability to obtain venous access, for parenteral nutrition you need a venous access. If you don't have an IV line, you cannot start parenteral nutrition. Or if the patient's prognosis is not very good, if you see the patient is terminally ill, or it's a moribund patient, he is unlikely to survive, then there's no fun giving him added trauma and this TPN. Or when risks exceed the potential benefits. This is a simple assessment. If parenteral nutrition is too much risky and it's not going to give you much benefit, you don't go for it. You always, for any procedure, for any intervention, you always try to balance the risks and the benefits. If the risks are more, you don't go for that procedure. If the benefits are more, then you may proceed. So for parenteral nutrition, we have two main routes. One is the central route and the other is the peripheral route. Central route is used to give total parenteral nutrition when we are giving the person's daily caloric requirement totally through the parenteral route. We need to have a central line. It is given into a central vein, which may be internal jugular vein, which may be a subclavian or a femoral vein. There is another option of peripherally inserted central catheters. You pass a catheter into a peripheral vein, a basilic vein or something like a cephalic vein, and then you just milk it into the vena cava. You may also use that. Now it is entering through a peripheral vein, but the tip of the catheter is lying in the vena cava, in a major vein, so we also consider it as a central route. And whenever you want to give any solution that is either too much concentrated, or it has very low or very high pH, or the volume is very high, you need a central line, because in central lines the blood flow is usually somewhere around 2 to 6 liters per minute, and the drug will be diluted. Whatever you're giving, it will be diluted. It will not cause so much reaction. Peripheral lines are usually inserted into smaller peripheral veins. Most of them are unnamed veins, and sometimes peripheral route may also be used in combination with the enteral route. We call it partial parenteral nutrition, in which you are giving some amount of calories through the enteral route and the remaining calories through the parenteral route. When the patient is able to take orally, but he is not able to tolerate much of it, so we supplement that enteral route with a small degree of parenteral nutrition. Central parenteral nutrition may be used temporarily, or it may be used for long-term solution. It may be kept in situ for 3 to 6 months even, or even longer. In FreeNF formulation with osmolarities more than 900 milliosmoles per liter, you can give concentrated solutions through the central route. Has anyone of you ever been injected Claricid, Claribect, clarithromycin? That antibiotic is it causes phlebitis, and when you inject it through a peripheral route, it causes severe pain and inflammation in that vein. But if you inject that same antibiotic into a larger vein, then it becomes diluted and the reaction is not so severe. This is just an example of how injecting an antibiotic or injecting any element into the vein may cause problems. So if you're going to inject anything with an osmolarity of more than 900 milliosmoles per liter, you need a central line. And this 900 milliosmoles per liter, if I just translate for you, you cannot give anything more concentrated than 9% solution. Okay. If you want to give 5% dextrose water, you can give it through a peripheral line. But if you want to give 10% dextrose water, you need to pass it through a central line. And if you want to give 25% dextrose water, then definitely you need a peripheral central line, because anything more than 9% is not suitable for a peripheral line. Subclavian vein is the most commonly used vein, and also you need to keep strict aseptic measures when you're passing in a central line. What are the advantages? We need a central access for total parenteral nutrition or through a central route. This central access can give us added advantages as well. For example, if you passed double lumen catheter for dialysis, you can use one of the limbs for parenteral nutrition as well. Similarly, if you pass the central line, you can use that same line to assess the jugular venous pressure. Multiple lumens can be used in acute emergency. So if you passed a double lumen catheter, you haven't used it for dialysis yet, you can use both of those lines, because double lumen has actually 2 lumens going through the same catheter into the vein, and you can use both lumens for nutrition if it's an emergency. Hypertonic solutions, as I already discussed, can be given, and it can be placed for more than 6 weeks. What are the disadvantages? We need to take too much care for it. We need to insert it in an operation theatre under strict aseptic measures, because if you introduce it with an infection, you will push that infection directly into the heart. And there are other multiple complications which we will discuss one by one. Some of these are catheter related complications. For example, during insertion you may injure the vessel itself, you may injure the vessel wall, or you may injure the nerves close to the vessel, or you may cause pneumothorax. As I already said, centrally placed lines can cause sepsis, septicemia, or even septic shock. Thrombophlebitis, because you're giving concentrated solutions and you're keeping this catheter in place for longer duration of time, thrombophlebitis is always a possibility, and this thrombophlebitis will then increase the chances of thromboembolic phenomena as well. And all very important thing, there are chances of air embolism. If the lumen of the catheter remains open, air may inadvertently be injected into the venous line and leads to air embolism. Then in total parenteral nutrition, we always need to keep in mind the possibility of hypo or hyperglycemia depending upon the treatment regime you're given. And you may also have problems with other nutrients as well. One of the important is hypophosphatemia. Hypophosphatemia is important when we consider refeeding syndrome. Refeeding syndrome is something when you have a patient who has not had enough nutrients for some time, for about 10 days, and when you start to refeed him aggressively, it causes potentially fatal shifts in fluid and electrolytes. And the cause is hormonal and metabolic changes that take place in the body. And the hallmark of refeeding syndrome is hypophosphatemia. So if you have a patient who has been starving for more than 10 days and you have tried to aggressively resuscitate him or give him nutrients, you may push him into a refeeding syndrome. That is why we always start slowly. If a patient's daily requirement comes up to, let's say, 2.5 liters, on the first day you give only 1 liter, and the second day you give 2 liters, on the third day you give 2.5 liters, and from there on you continue with the 2.5 liters. You do not give the maximum dose on the first day. You start gradually. And the second important thing to prevent refeeding syndrome is you do not try to compensate these electrolytes before you compensate the other nutrients. You always start with carbohydrates, proteins and fats, and along with these three major nutrients you add these smaller nutrients, these electrolytes, these vitamins and minerals. You don't do these separately or beforehand. So, hypercapnia is one of the complications. Hypercapnia is due to, if a patient already has some respiratory complications, that will complicate situation. And secondly, when you're given these parenteral diets, they will increase the production of CO2 in the blood. So the patient may have hypercapnia. Hypertriglyceridemia, the circulating lipids are deranged. Essential fatty acid deficiency, triglycerides are increasing and essential fatty acids are decreasing. Cholestasis and cholecystitis, abnormal digestion of the fats and inflammation of the gallbladder, because the these biliary salts are now being getting stagnated in the gallbladder, and from there they cause problems. And loss of structural and functional integrity of the intestine. When you are not using the intestine, it will start losing its villi, and that leads to bacterial translocation. The second important thing is peripherally inserted central catheters. As I already said, there are lines which are passed through peripheral lines and then melt into the vena cava. They may be kept for up to 1 year with proper maintenance and without as many complications as a central line. And they may be used in ambulatory settings. For example, if the patient is walking around, he is functional but he cannot use his DIT, you just pass this peripheral inserted central catheter and use it for his partial or total parenteral nutrition. What are the advantages? It's a bedside technique. It can be done anywhere, in the ward, in the home, and it avoids complications of central catheters and avoids multiple venous cannulations, because you cannot keep a central catheter for more than 6 weeks. Hypertonic solutions can be given even through this. What are disadvantages? You need trained personnel to pass this line. If the line gets blocked anywhere on its way from the peripheral line up to the vena cava, then you have a problem. If the line gets malpositioned, it doesn't go where you want it to go, then it's phlebitis, always it's a risk, sepsis and thrombosis. Peripheral parenteral nutrition is used when the therapy is expected for a short duration, 5 to 7 days maximum, not more than that. When the energy and protein needs are moderate, and when the formulation osmolarity is less than 600 or 900, you don't need to give too much concentrated solutions. And when fluid restriction is not necessary, because keep in mind, when you're not giving concentrated solutions, these solutions will not have a high caloric yield. So when you want to increase calories, you will have to increase the fluid amount you're giving as well. So if it's not a problem, if the renal function is fine, if the patient is not at any risk of renal failure, then you may use a peripheral line and you may give as much fluid as you want. What are the advantages? It is less expensive, it is easy to place and easy to remove, and lowest risk of complication. Disadvantages: it causes high level of phlebitis, and you need to change the catheter every 2 to 3 days, and amount of calories is limited due to fluids, and you cannot give high osmolarity or low pH or high pH solutions. So how do we calculate the nutrient needs for any individual? We use certain criteria. How do we calculate? Is we multiply the patient's ideal body weight with 25 kilocalories per day, and we provide most of these calories as carbohydrates, and then the remaining part is lipids. We try to make sure that the proteins that are being given are not used for energy. These proteins should be used to treat the catabolism that the patient is in. These proteins should be used to rebuild the patient. They shouldn't be used for calories. Proteins are given almost 1 gram per kg per day, but if the patient is under too much physiological stress, then you need to increase it to about 1.5 grams per kg per day. Water requirement is easy to calculate. It is either 30 ml per kg per day or 1 ml per kilocalorie that you want to give, and monitor urine output and JVP to assess if you're giving adequate fluid. Then next thing is, how do we monitor? Some clinical assessments help us. You just measure the patient's weight, you measure the patient's urine output, fluid balance, fluid giving, going into the patient, fluid coming out of the patient. You just balance those things. You check the vital signs. You check if the patient is generally well, he is walking around, he is talking, he is sensible. Then these are the assessment measures that will give you a hint that the patient's nutritional status is intact. Then there are some lab measures. You get some blood tests done. You get electrolytes and glucose done daily along with blood urea. You have to get it done daily. And in diabetic patients, or when you're thinking that you might have hypo or hyperglycemia, you need to get glucose done 3 times a day. Then every 3rd day you need to get some other test done. You get creatinine done, albumin, phosphate, calcium, magnesium, hemoglobin and WBC count. You get these tests done every 3rd day, and then you get PT-INR done every week. When you have a patient on total parenteral nutrition, you need to get this lab workup done. Some of these are to be done daily, some of these are done on every 3rd or 4th day, and some are done weekly. This is a very important thing. This is the point on which MCQs and SCQs are made during prof. Which solutions are available to us? We have different solutions. Some are single nutrient solutions, for example dextrose, 5% dextrose, 10% dextrose, 25% dextrose. Then we have lipids in the form of lipofundin. This is a brand name. We have amino acids in the form of aminovel. Then there are some other nutrient bags as well, 2-in-1 solutions in which it's a 2-chambered bag. It's one bag which has two portions, they are separate. One portion contains amino acids plus electrolytes and the other has dextrose. These 2-in-1 solutions do not contain fats and you need to give fats separately. These two separate chambers can be mixed. Okay, you just press the two chambers, the seal in between them breaks and the two fluids they mix with each other. You just mix them just before transfusing and then you transfuse that fluid. It is usually something around 1.5 to 2 liters. It's two separate formulations are available. One is 1.5 liters, the other is 2 liters. The one having 1.5 liters volume contains 1500 calories and the other has 2000 calories. Remember, you're giving fats separately and you need to calculate those calories and that fluid as well. Then now we have 3-in-1 solutions. They have all the three components: fat, lipid and carbohydrates, proteins and lipids. All three components in 3 separate chambers plus electrolytes in the amino acid chamber. Same thing with this, you mix the 3 chambers just before transfusing. The volume is 2 liters and the calories given is 2000 kilocalories from one bag. So this was all about total parenteral nutrition. If you have any questions, I am always available on WhatsApp or you can contact me any other way. Thank you very much.